The Battle of the Sittang Bend and the Japanese Breakout across Pegu Yomas were linked Japanese military operations during the Burma Campaign, which took place nearly at the end of World War II. Surviving elements of the Imperial Japanese Army who had been driven into the Pegu Yoma attempted to break out eastwards, to join other Japanese troops retreating from the British forces. The breakout was the objective of the Japanese 28th Army, with support at first from the 33rd Army and later the 15th Army. As a preliminary, the Japanese 33rd Army attacked Allied positions in the Sittang Bend, near the mouth of the river, to distract the Allies. The British had been alerted to the breakout attempt and it ended calamitously, with many losses and some formations being wiped out. Around 14,000 Japanese were lost, with well over half being killed, while British forces suffered only 95 killed and 322 wounded. The breakout attempt and the ensuing battle became the last significant land battle of the Western powers in the Second World War. Background: by early 1944, the British forces in India had been reinforced and had expanded the supply infrastructure, which made it possible for them to contemplate an attack into Burma. The Japanese attempted to forestall them by an invasion of India, which led to a great Japanese defeat and other setbacks in northern Burma. Following a further defeat at the hands of William Slim in the 14th Army at Mikatila and Mandalay and Operation Dracula, the recapture of Rangoon, the Japanese were further handicapped in the defense of Burma. By this time the Burmese National Army under Aung San had switched sides and was hunting down Japanese patrols and foraging parties. During April, the British and Indian Fourth Corps advanced 300 miles from central Burma down the valley of the Sittang River. Japanese rearguards prevented them advancing all the way to Rangoon, the capital and main port of Burma, but on the 2nd of May, Rangoon fell to an Allied amphibious landing. On the 6th of May, the leading troops of 17th Division, leading the 4th Corps advance, linked up with the troops who had carried out Dracula at Ilagu, 28 miles northeast of Rangoon. After the fall of Rangoon, the 14th Army HQ under Slim moved to Ceylon to plan operations to recapture Malaya and Singapore. A new 12th Army headquarters under Lieutenant General Montague Stopford was formed from 33rd Corps HQ. It took over 4th Corps in the Sittang Valley and directly commanded some divisions in the Irrawaddy Valley. The Japanese 28th Army under Lieutenant General Shozo Sakuri, after retreating from Arakan and the Irrawaddy Valley, had reached the Pegu Yomas, a range of low mountains, hills and uplands between the Irrawaddy and the Sittang River in central Burma. They were joined by Major General Haiji Matsui's 105th Independent Mixed Brigade, also known as Kani, force which had faced 4th Corps. The Japanese trapped in the Pegu Yomas prepared a breakout operation to rejoin the Burma Area Army and escape into Thailand with them. The Sittang was unfordable and was therefore a significant military barrier, as it had been in 1942 during the First Burma Campaign. General Hitro Kimura, the commander of Burma Area Army, ordered the 33rd Army to cover this breakout by a diversionary offensive across the Sittang, although the entire army could muster the strength of barely a brigade. In support, the 15th Army were to coordinate their efforts with the 28th Army if the operation was failing to meet its objective. Operation. British intelligence were aware of the intended breakout but had no detailed information. Sir Stopford ordered General Frank Messervy, the 4th Corps commander, to spread the corps over more than 100 miles of front to block the way. On the 2nd of July 1945, a Gurkha patrol ambushed and wiped out a small Japanese force and captured a dispatch bag containing the complete operational plan for the Japanese breakout. The intelligence was quickly distributed among the British forces, which had 2 weeks to prepare. One of the intended Japanese routes of march lay directly across the 17th Indian Division headquarters at Penwigon, and Messerview reinforced this critical sector with 64th Indian Brigade from the 19th Indian Division. The Japanese planned to advance to the Sittang in 3 columns, under strict rules of engagement forbidding use of firearms in favor of the bayonet and forbidding any radio communication. Once they had crossed the Sittang on rafts mostly made of bamboo, Sakurai underestimated the British strength arrayed against him but believed he could get over half his force across in fighting shape. First battle. The Japanese 33rd Army attacked the Sittang Bend on 3 July 1945, attempting to assist the breakout. The attack was mistimed, taking place a week before 28th Army made its advance to the river. The Japanese were allowed to advance unaware that the plans were unknown to the British, until many of the troops were in exposed positions, and then a barrage of shellfire and bombing started. Artillery bombarded the Japanese attack. Royal Artillery forward observation officers continually monitored Japanese movements and gave the signal to fire. Royal Air Force cab rank patrols under the direction of visual control posts called upon squadrons of Spitfires and Thunderbolts on Japanese targets. The destruction on 4 July of 3 105mm guns by the Thunderbolts of No. 42 Squadron was an example of air power success. By the 7th of July, Kimura ordered 33rd Army, having suffered casualties, to halt operations and pulled them back, hoping it would be enough to enable the 28th Army to break out. The British knew of this anyway and switched their attention to that sector. Battle of the Breakout on the 15th of July. The 28th Army, despite the mistiming of the 33rd Army's attack, began the breakout attempt, unaware that the British knew of the plans. The monsoon had begun and the British created 2 killing fields, the first for artillery and the second using aircraft to attack those who managed to cross the road, especially between the Sittang and the Salween rivers. Foos were used in the air and the ground. Tanks and infantry, motorized and on foot, covered the gaps between the positions despite the monsoon. The Allied Patriotic Burma forces would deal with any survivors on the east bank of the Sittang. As such, the Japanese 55th Division ran straight into the 19th Indian Division's strongpoint at Penwigon. Tanks and infantry repelled every attack, inflicting huge losses. British forward observation officers on the far side of the Sittang continued to call down artillery fire on the Japanese as the survivors attempted to reform and move south. Casualties were appalling and it was in reality a one-sided battle. The RAF had also attacked troop concentrations and river craft of all kinds. 273 Squadron and 607 Squadron had killed about 500 Japanese in the village of Hpan. When British and Burmese troops came in to take control, the 600 men of the Japanese 13th Naval Guard Force broke out separate from the main body due to confusion and ambushes, and only a handful survived. On the 21st of July, the Japanese began the last and most desperate attempt to cross the Sittang with the remaining 15,000 troops, many of whom were sick. The 54th Division, having suffered heavily from cholera and dysentery, stepped off from the Pegu Yomas and crossed the flooded paddy fields to the Sittang. Every available Allied tank, gun, mortar and machine gun was at once thrown in against them, and despite low clouds and heavy rains, every squadron which was able to sortie. The Thunderbolt could carry 3 500-pound bombs and the Spitfire a 500-pound bomb, and these played havoc among concentrations of moving Japanese troops. Many incidents occurred where RAF ground observers exposed themselves to friendly fire. A visual controller, Flight Lieutenant J. Taylor, and a corporal were able to direct around 17 aircraft at a time onto targets only 250 yards from the post. Both were wounded by bomb splinters from RAF fighter bombers, with British guns, in particular the devastation caused by the 5.5-INCH, 4.5-INCH and the 25-pounders already shelling the routes. The Japanese were slaughtered, and this would last until the end of July. Last actions. Near the end of July, a last desperate offensive of the Japanese had been brought to a halt. The Japanese 15th Army then stepped in to help the shattered survivors of the 28th Army. The Karen guerrillas were able to ambush hundreds of Japanese soldiers and attack elements from the 15th Army. The Allied liaison organization Force 136 operated with them and used Westland Lysanders to remove the seriously wounded, prisoners and documents, and bring in urgent stores. They provided targets not only for Spitfires and Thunderbolts but called on the Beaufighters and Mosquitoes of the Tactical Air Force. By the 29th of July, the 15th Army retired, realizing that the breakout was a disaster but had succeeded in at least rescuing a number of scattered groups. By the time the battle had died down, only a few Japanese units made it across, having reached the Sittang by the 7th of August before the whole area was cleared by Allied infantry. Aftermath. The breakout was a dismal failure and sapped Japanese morale further. The ragged elements were continually harassed by Karen guerrillas, and the RAF. Mesevi and Stopford described the breakout as a heroic effort and stated that most of the 660 prisoners were taken only because they were incapable of further effort, highlighting the tenacity of the Japanese soldier even when starved and disease-ridden. Of the Japanese losses, the unit that suffered the lowest percentage of casualties was in the 105th Independent Mixed Brigade. Of 4,173 men, more than 2,000 got across the Sittang. The 13th Naval Guard Force was annihilated, with only a handful of its original 600 men escaping. A substantial number, at least 70 and perhaps more, deserted while still in the Pegu Yomas. This force suffered the heaviest casualties of any formation in this costly operation. The 54th Division had suffered huge losses. More than 5,000 were lost breaking out across the Sittang. Of the 9,000 men of the 55th Division that started the breakout, fewer than 4,000 made it to the Tenasserim. Out of 18,000 men directly controlled by 28th Army, less than 6,000 in total managed to reach the east bank of the Sittang. The British and Allied forces, in addition to having claimed 1,500 being sick to disease throughout the period, had suffered no more than 95 men killed and 322 wounded, a small number of these coming from friendly fire. The Royal Air Force flew a total of 3,045 sorties and dropped some 750 long tons of bombs. The loss of so many Japanese troops was largely due to British air power and artillery fire. To the soldiers that fought here, they coined the battle a gunner's war. With this defeat, the Japanese Burma Area Army was reduced to an ineffective fighting force. With the majority of Burma liberated, word that Japan had surrendered on the 15th of August only increased the anxiety of the Japanese to get to the Tenasserim Hills. They did not, however, wish to be immobilized on the eastern bank of the Sittang, so another 2,000 more died after the battle had been fought, many in the first days of peace. It was the last big battle on land of World War II involving the Western Allies. On the 13th of September 1945, the remaining units of the once formidable Japanese Burma Area Army surrendered to the British.